welcome back to the lecture series. We are discussing magical realism. So, this is a continuation from where we stopped last time. We are looking at the different features of magical realism as a genre, as a form that is very much, an offshoot of the postmodern conditions, postmodern artwork. So the reader experiences the closeness or near merging of two realms, of two worlds. So, following H.P. Dewar in Dreamtime, one might say that in many magical realist works, to quote Dewar, perhaps you are aware that seeing takes place only if you smuggle yourself in between worlds, the world of ordinary people and that of the witches, unquote. So the magical realist vision exists at the intersection of these two worlds at an imaginary point inside a kind of double-edged mirror that reflects both these directions, that is capable of grasping uh, both these meanings. So fluid boundaries between the world of the living and that of the dead are traced only to be crossed. So once we understand this boundary, the fluid boundary between the world of the living and that of the dead, the expectation from a reader is that to transcend the liminal and be able to flow with the narrative. Uh, Such is happening in texts such as 100 Years of Solitude, Midnight's Children, That Voice, Distant Relations, The White Hotel, and Ironweed. So, if fiction is exhausted in this world, then the magical realist texts create another continuous world in which fiction can spill over, right? In a way, the boundary that I was talking about, the liminality between this world and that world, that state is transcended, and the reader, in a sense, continues life beyond the realms of life, the scope of life in the realm of death. So, another related boundary that ought to be blurred is that between the fact and the fiction. According to Brian McHale, magical realism is at the heart of postmodern writing. In a chapter titled The World Next Door, McHale explores the generalized effect of a fantastic change which seems to be diffused in all postmodernist writings. McHale claims that the hesitation in traditional fantastic writing between this world and the next world has been displaced to, I quote him, the confrontation between different ontological levels in the structure of texts in magical realist works. So, moving on to the next feature of magical realist fictions question any kind of received ideas about uh, time, space, and identity. So, to quote from 100 Years of Solitude, 4 years, 11 months, and 2 days of rain, and an insomnia plague that erases the past and hence the meaning of words. A room in which it is always March and always Monday. Jose Arcadio, who languishes half dead and half alive for years under a banana tree in the courtyard of his house, and a final whirlwind that abolishes a race's second opportunity on earth. Through all these instances in 100 Years of Solitude, our sense of time is literally shaken, and we have to understand time and temporality afresh, anew. So, our sense of space is similarly challenged when one finds tropical plants growing over the Paris Automobile Club's pool in distant relations. So it defies any kind of naturalness. In this context, I would also like to bring in the discussion on map and map making, which is seen as a crazy project both by Borges and by Baudrillard. So they are postmodernist, and they say that the colonizers' project of knowing everything about the colony, uh, being able to extensively and intensively cover the length and breadth of the colony through the map, to the extent that the map precedes the territory, the map becomes a simulacrum without a referent, the original referent. There is a lot of epistemic violence associated with this kind of map making. There is power and hegemony at play. Uh, as a way of defying this, we find Robert Croech writing in What the Crow Said at one point towards the beginning, uh, neither here nor there, so defying uh, any kind of map making on the indigenous people. So the map of the white man cannot locate, identify, understand, and lay out everything about the indigenous existence. The alternative existence that Croech talks about in What the Crow Said, uh, uh, flies out of, evaporates from the white man's enterprise of map making. Our sense of space, like I was saying, and time are therefore both jolted, both shaken by the genre of magical realism. As Frederick Jameson sets out the project of realism, one thing it achieves is, to quote Jameson, the emergence of a new space and a new temporality, unquote. Its spatial homogeneity abolishes the older forms of sacred space. Likewise, the newly measuring clock and measurable routine replace older forms of ritual, sacred, and cyclical time. So, with Renaissance, with science and technology, we have notion of a time that can be measured, a space that can be uh, quantified. This is where realism is basically coming from, the uniform clock, like the Big Ben, the calendrical time. So we have we can quantify time, how much time has elapsed. It could be 4 days or 4 months, but then magical realism and postmodernism plays with both these things. Time can be shrunk, or where 1 year passes at the blink of eye, and 1 minute stays forever. So there is an erosion of Jameson's description by magical realist works and by modern and postmodern works. Many magical realist fictions, just like their 19th century Gothic predecessors, carefully delineate the sacred enclosures, such as Aura's house, uh, Mekondo, a fictional place, Salim's pickle factory, and pickle jars, Branley's house, Baby Sucks's leafy clearing, and these sacred spaces, which are very closed cosmos, they are a world in and of their own. They emanate their magical narrative of the rest of the text, and uh, the mood, the cosmos they generate and describe also inform the spirit of the text. So magical realism reorients not only our habits and our understandings of time and space, but also our sense of identity. So with over 500 children of midnight talking through one person's head, is Salim uh, sane anymore? Uh, Similarly, in distant relations, the reader asks, who is the voice in that voice? And what are the relations Who are the relations we are talking about? So, according to Linda Hutchin, to quote her, in The White Hotel, the realist novel's concept of the subject, both in history and in fiction, is openly contested. Unquote. That contestation is all the more, cogent and convincing because it comes from within. The magic contests, but it contests from within the realist premises, realistically rendered historical fiction, and from the vantage point of the realistically conceived narrator. As we read magical realist texts, the magic seems to grow almost imperceptibly out of the real dimensions, giving us what Salman Rushdie would call a dense commingling of the improbable and the mundane. So, a graphic illustration of this phenomenon, an extension of the strong mimetic quotient of magic uh, and its relation with historical dimension, is observable in the way events are usually grounded in a traditionally realistic, even in an explicitly factual manner. So, magical realism is not something that cannot be documented, that cannot be grasped, and it is not talking about something otherworldly. It is dealing with this world through the uninitiated eye, through the eye of the other. Just harken back what I said, the context of Bach's work, mythologies. For someone who doesn't know the wedding culture um, in southern Africa or in India, the myth, the relation of the form and the meaning, the signifier and the signified, seems ridiculous. It could seem preposterous, uh, right? So, this vision is something uh, that the reader has to engender for all kinds of cultural activities, that there is nothing uh, intrinsic, nothing natural about them. They function smoothly because the entire society has generationally agreed to see certain things in terms of certain meanings, certain significance. So, Felipe Montero in Aura reads the magically potent job that he will eventually take in the newspaper. The White Hotel begins with fictional letters from Ferenczi and Freud. Rushdie situates his narrative in the events surrounding India's independence and the turmoil that follow. So, just when Remedios the Beauty's levitation begins concretely and for real, Fernanda, while hanging out the laundry, feels, to quote from the book, a delicate wind of light pull the sheets out of her hand and open them up wide. Unquote. Remnants of this quality, this marriage between the mundane and the magic of magic's gentle blossoming out of real ordinary happenings, persist even when the fantastical elements show their colors quickly, transitorily, in a fleeting manner, and yet clearly enough. So, in Perfume, for example, Jean Baptiste Grenouille, with his magically powerful and discriminating sense of smell, is born in a geographical space in, to quote from the book, in Paris, under the sway of a particularly fiendish stench, unquote. And later in the text, there is mention of a catalogue of stenches, to quote, barely conceivable to us modern men and women, unquote. So, Crinwell is a product of this smelly environment, the smells, the different stenches that cannot be grasped by the modern and postmodern sensibility. So, a smell, a sensory quality or experience that is associated with uh, history, with time, uh, a smell that has no register, no recognition in the current times. Greenville is a product of such an environment. Perhaps as a way of compensating for his mother's utterly dulled sense of smell. The next feature that we are going to talk about is that metafictional dimensions are common in contemporary magical realism. So, metafiction is a very common feature. The, the fact that the texts provide commentaries on themselves, often complete with the occasional mission abime or story within a story, which refers to miniature emblematic textual self portraits, right? So, magical power of fiction itself, the capacities of mind that make it possible, as well as the elements out of which it is made, could be signs, images, metaphors, could be narrators. All of these foreground the metafictional effects. So, the reader is constantly aware how the fiction is being produced. So, in Midnight's Children, metaphors for the making of fictions uh, from the partial view attained by a Muslim doctor of his patient through a hole in a bed sheet to chutnification of history. So, this is a peculiar term that uh, Rushdie uses, chutnification of history in jars, and they recur throughout the narrative with amazing frequency, right? So, to quote from Midnight's Children, to pickle is to give immortality after all. Fish, vegetables, fruit hang embalmed in spice and vinegar. A certain alteration, a slight intensification of taste is a small matter, surely. The art is to change the flavor in degree, but not in kind. And above all, in my 30 jars and a jar, equaling the 31 chapters of the novel, to give it shape and form, that is to say, meaning. I have mentioned my fear of absurdity. So, this is something that Rushdie has to say about his work, Midnight's Children. Beloved seems to have an almost metafictional dimension about her. Beloved seems to elicit stories at various points in the narrative. To quote from Morrison's work, "Tell me," said Beloved, smiling a wide, happy smile, "tell me your diamonds." It became a way to feed her. Siti learned the profound satisfaction the beloved got from storytelling. As she began telling about the earrings, she found herself wanting to liking it. Unquote. When the name of Fuentes's character Artemio Cruz appears in 100 Years of Solitude, or even poet Paul Eluard is mentioned in Kundera's The Book of Laughter and Forgetting, the reader experiences the magical power of ghastly presences in the literary heritage, right? So, this is also the quality of intertextuality, where one text is constantly borrowing from and informing other texts. The texts happen in a continuum. The texts happen in a continuum of a given tradition. In this case, the tradition of postmodernism and magical realism. So the reader may experience a particular kind of verbal magic where the gap between the word and the world closes. This is another chief characteristic of magical realist writing. In other words, a demonstration of the linguistic nature of a magical experience is frequently there in a magical realist work. A magic happens. So, magic happens when a metaphor is made real. One often says that blood is thicker than water. That's a common saying. And this is further extrapolated and extended in 100 Years of Solitude, where Jose Arcadio Buendia shoots himself. A trickle of his blood, to quote from the text, came out under the door, went out into the street, went down steps and climbed over curbs, turned a corner to the right and another to the left. Unquote. And once inside the Windia house, hugged the walls so as not to stain things, and came out in his mother Ursula's kitchen. So, when this sort of literalization happens, either the reader's imagination or the text itself supplies words. Shortly before Remedios's levitation, the reader gets to know uh, that Remedios, the beauty, was not a creature of this world. Similarly, in Midnight's Children, one hears that Salim is handcuffed to history, and that and then witnesses the invasion of his head by the voices of his compatriots. This linguistic magic, which runs through magical realism, thrives on, like I said, the intertextual practice that is prevalent in many postmodern writings, as well as through the presence of an intertextual bricolage. So, intertextual magic in which characters from other fictions appear is relatively common, and seen from this angle, one could say that Don Quixote is one of the first magical realist novels. This experimentation celebrates the solidity of inventiveness, which takes the reader beyond representation, uh, you know, to the realm of representations. We are not talking about mimesis in the traditional realist sense, but we are talking about new objectivity, representation of the old, the self same world. The reader is surprised by the literality of the play of language in linguistically motivated fictional moments, right? So, the blood that travels becomes a magical object. It has its own destiny, its own small story, its own small point of view to follow in 100 years of solitude. So, the next point I'm going to talk about is the magical realist narrative, appearing to the late 20th century adult reader as fresh, childlike, and even to an extent primitive. Wonders are recounted in a matter of fact way, as accepted, presumably as a child would accept them without undue questioning or reflection. So, magical realist works achieve a kind of defamiliarization that appears to be artless and guileless, not something uh, that is premeditated, as if in homage to the fresh vision of discovering ice. We find in Midnight's Children, towards the beginning of the novel, Salim's grandfather, Adam Aziz, begins a day in Kashmir in the following way. To quote from the text, the world was new again. After a winter's gestation in its eggshell of ice, the valley had beaked its way out into the open. Unquote. So, Milan Kundera presents a different kind of freshness that emerges and happens, that takes off from the position of totalitarian terror. So, we have one cheap totalitarian terror on the one hand, and a freshness emerging from and because of that, especially in chapters where we find Tamina reaching the dystopian island of children, or even Lisa entering into the shocking extermination at Babi Yar. So, moving on to the next feature, repetition as a narrative principle is common in magical realist works in conjunction with uh, mirrors or their analogues that are used symbolically or structurally. And these analogues create a magic of shifting references. So, for example, Salim's life in Midnight's Children mirrors that of the new post colonial Indian nation with which he himself was born. We have an analogy here, a mirror that stands between Salim's conditions and which is reflective of India's conditions at that time. George Louis Borges's Aleph reflects all the world and the self. In Cortázar's story, Axolotl, the aquarium wall through which the narrator watches the axolotls and through which he finally passes, is a kind of magical spatial mirror. So, similarly, the place of Cortázar's narrator in The Night Face Up between modern and Aztec worlds is a temporal uh, double sided mirror. So, in distant relations, the doubling of characters and stories that constitutes a mirror principle of narrative structure is reinforced through reflecting surfaces within the novel, especially through the symbol of the windows. So, a similar kind of narrative that mirrors shapes is the White Hotel, where the same story is retold through reflected personalities. Like reflections in actual mirrors, the reflected narratives are and yet are not the same as the original one. The term original in this context is very contentious, very problematic. What is original? Postmodern talks about the death of the uh, reference, right? The death of the real. Next is metamorphosis, which is a common event in magical realism. So, metamorphosis is also a common event in magical realism. Metamorphosis embody collision of two different worlds in the realm of organisms. We are immediately reminded of Gregor Samsa transforming from a human to an insect. In Axolotl, the narrator becomes axolotl or vice versa. There is transmigration of soul. In India, beliefs regarding reincarnation make metamorphosis through time particularly ubiquitous. And many of the characters in Midnight's Children duplicate one of the deities. So Salim's much mentioned nose corresponds to Ganesh, the elephant headed god's trunk. Uh, and then Salim's chutnification of history refers to his art of transforming and preserving the chaotic passage of time and events, which is metaphorical in nature and spirit. A carnivalesque spirit is common in magical realist novels where language is used extravagantly and expend its resources beyond its referential needs. So, language kind of blows up. It creates a carnivalesque kind of spirit. That is another feature of the magical realist artwork, especially the magical realist novel. So, Jean Francois Lyotard may be imagined to have the oppositional terms of magical realism in mind when he calls for resistance to retrogressive desires as a way of, to quote Lyotard, the realization of the fantasy to seize reality, unquote. One could say that in magical realist texts, the answer is to wage a war on any kind of totality or any kind of grand narrative, meta narrative to explain in a Lyotardian way. So, wage a war on totality to be witnesses to the unpresentable and the unrepresentable and the irreducible. In some, to affirm the magic of the storyteller's art, to invite Shehrazad's children over to play, whatever the ignorance of the rules of our games and however fantastically they may be dressed. So here we are talking about the germ of magical realism and postmodernism being very much present in 1001 Nights. So although the in terms of clothing, in terms of their forms, these characters such as Sherazade they might look anachronistic and even peculiar to the modern eyes. The or even Don Quixote might look too out of context in the modern and postmodern sense. So it is with them that the tendencies of modernism and postmodernism began, through relying on the implausible, the magical, and trying to foreground the magical through reality and vice versa. So Midnight's Children is carnivalesque in its conscious adoption of the style of a Bombay talkie. So it's a cast of thousands songs. It is marked by dances, exaggerated, sumptuous scenarios, also horrifying blood and gore, and this is a baroque mode of overextension, almost a hyperbole. Shehrazade's narratives, which are 1001 in number, refer to a numeral of excess. So, person that keeps telling stories till 3 years have elapsed and they count as 1001. So, it is emblematic of the notion that there is always one more, and it is also symptomatic of the modern novel, a characteristic of modern novel where we are closing because we have to give it. So there is some kind of authorial control being imposed as a way of closing it. Otherwise, there is no internal logic, there is no internal and natural termination to these stories leading to another story and so forth. Right. So, Jean-Francois Lyotard characterizes the postmodern as, to quote Lyotard, that which searches for new presentations in order to impart a stronger sense of the unpresentable, unquote. So, magical realism exemplifies this notion in its paradoxical name itself. Part of its attraction for postmodern writers may be its willfully oxymoronic nature, its exposing, its debunking and cracking open the unpresentable, its activation of and playing with the differences. So, coming to magical realism shares common characteristics such as the ability to employ a narrative style that is vivid and imaginative. It has the power of infusing reality with the unexpected and the incomprehensible, incorporating elements from fairy tales, stargazing, mythology, and fantasy. Now, these elements are seamlessly blended, the reality part with the fantastic part. The mundane aspects of reality are often presented through the kaleidoscopic visualization of the novelist. So, the primary purpose of integrating magical elements into a realistic setting is to interpret the principles of reality and create a distinction between fantasy and the tangible world. Categorizing magical realism into a specific literary theory would be challenging. Within literary theory, the concept of magical realism is contentious. Attempts at distinguishing it from adjacent genres such as the fantastic, fabulation, the baroque, metafiction, the uncanny, or the spectacular have not been consistently successful. As a result, it is not very surprising that some critics have not even tried to define what magical realism is. The term magic realism or magical realism remains contested due to the majority of critics focusing on one description rather than acknowledging its complex origins. Salman Rushdie, who is an eminent writer in the Indian diaspora, currently residing in England, started his writing career clandestinely but quickly rose to prominence in the 20th century. Despite facing backlash and a lot of criticism and rants from the Islamic fundamentalists for his work, The Satanic Verses, which was published in 1988, Rushdie gained recognition for thought-provoking investigations that transformed the socio-political landscape in works including Midnight's Children that was published in 1981 and Shame which was published in 1983. So Rushdie's debut novel Grimus, published in 1975, combines elements of science with fantasy. The narrative follows Flapping Eagle, who is a young Indian that attains immortality after consuming a magic elixir. In a review by the Times Literary Supplement, Mel Tilden describes this book as captivating and often wonderful, characterizing it as a work which transcends traditional science fiction with its inclusion of diverse universes, alien creatures, dimensional doorways, and multiple madmen. Salman Rushdie's second book, Midnight's Children, is an allegorical exploration of modern Indian history through the lives of 1001 children that were born at the moment of India's independence on 15th of August 1947. This novel delves into the partition of British India and the subsequent liberation of India from the British rule. So, critic Robert Towers of the New York Times praised this work for its depiction of the nation's rich past and its role in the turbulent Indian present. The book received acclaim, winning the Booker of Bookers Prize in 1993, and it was honored as the best of Bookers in 2008 again. Unique in its distinction, it is the sole Indian novel listed among the top 100 English language novels by the Times since 1923. Midnight's Children navigates the shift from British colonialism to independent India through the perspectives of individuals endowed with mystical powers. Salim Sinai, the narrator, weaves his family's historical experiences into the broader context of Indian history, emphasizing his personal connection as he recounts his tale to his wife Padma and to the readers. Salim, who was born at the exact moment of India's independence, serves as both the protagonist and a symbolic representative of the nation's quest for freedom. His disclosure that his disintegration will mirror the country's population signifies an intimate link between his individual story and the collective history of India. The novel very efficiently and masterfully blends realism with illusion, which is a hallmark of magical realism. From its outset, the narrative incorporates magical elements such as a scene in Salim's grandfather's mystical experiences in Kashmir. Through the magical and realistic interplay, Rushdie creates a narrative where each world contributes to the making of a fictional or a magical whole. The use of magical realist elements involves blending the fantastical with the reality, manipulating of time and flow of time, and incorporating elements of fantasy and folklore. Rushdie's magical realism draws inspiration from psychological and inner realms, dealing with inner conflicts, moments of vulnerability, and the perspective of an unreliable storyteller rather than conventional beliefs, customs, or societal illusions. Another manifestation of magical realism in the novel is evident through the character of Thai, the boatman, who claims to be ancient, having witnessed the birth of mountains and the demise of kings, and who therefore embodies the essence of the old and pre-colonial India. Political figure of Milan Abdullah exhibits a peculiar trait. His high-pitched whining causes physical effects such as windows breaking. The narrative further unfolds with fantastical events, including the birth of 1001 Midnight's children with magical powers and the intriguing character of Tai Bibi, who claims to be 512 years old and who possesses the ability to assume the scent of any individual. Salim's mother's fear of giving birth to a child with cauliflower instead of brain in his head, uh, Salim's telepathic abilities, and his later capacity to smell emotions, all of these contribute to the mystical elements in the uh, in the story of the novel. Rooted in his grandfather, and we see and this quality that Salim has you know developed to smell the emotions is inherited from his grandfather Adam, who similarly had an extraordinary nose which saved him from the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. So, the story talks about the inheritance of a peculiar, a special, a magical nose which has some extraordinary traits that has been passed on, that has been bequeathed from the grandfather to the grandson, Salim Sinai. The text emphasizes Salim Sinai's reliance on correspondences to interpret Indian history within the framework of events in his personal life, which is shaped by sensory impressions and associated emotions. This interplay between Salim's experiences and political events illustrates the connection between individual lives and public affairs in post colonial India, highlighting how Salim, who is tied to history by his unique birth, perceives a wealth of you know distinct stories, small personal mini narratives contributing to the meta history that India represents as a whole. His sense of exceptionalism and inflated importance that is rooted in his infancy and reinforced by his parents and a letter from the Prime Minister propels him to complete his story before his demise. So, he has this sense of exceptionalism and a sense of inflated self importance. One correspondence in Salim's experiences involves Jamila Singer's habit of burning shoes. Jamila Singer, who is also known as the brass monkey in the novel, and we see that Jamila Singer's habit of burning shoes is linked to the Suez Canal crisis and subsequent events such as the Israeli British French invasion of Egypt. So, the brass monkey's actions, symbolizing the stench of war, reflect the ambivalence of post colonial rulers rejecting colonial economic success. So, Salim's bleeding finger similarly parallels the bloody riots that took place in 1958, mirroring the communal tensions after the partition. These correspondences, the mishmash of mini and meta narratives, the mini histories and meta histories, the mini incidents, rather not histories, the personal narratives and the meta history, an interface between the two, delve into the fear of difference and social status, resonating with Salim's predicament and the fractures in his identity. So, Salim's importance, which is shared with Nadir Khan, leads to a deeper understanding of bonding beyond physical exchange. Salim contends that things and even humans can leak into each other. Humans can leak into each other empathetically. So, if one human has empathy for the other, they can he or she can leak into the other, highlighting thereby the significance of shared emotions. And women place influential and crucial roles in Salim's life, and the text underscores an almost amniotic world where emotions and ideas are constantly leaking and flowing into each other. Salim's telepathic abilities serve as a magical explanation for empathy, emphasizing the interconnectedness of individuals and ideas. So, the novel explores the theme of dualism and dissent. We see that amidst the growing reluctance within the Midnight Children's Conference, Salim expresses despair and urges the rejection of perpetual dualities such as masses and classes, capital and labor, them and us, this kind of dichotomy that has been shaping humanity in all societies almost. He implores the fulfillment of their birth promise by embracing what he calls as the third principle beyond binaries, beyond dichotomies, acting as a force that navigates between such dilemmas caused by dichotomies. However, Shiva, who is Salim's birthmate, dismisses his plea, asserting that the world is defined by stark contrasts like money and poverty, have and have not, or have and lack, the right and the left, and so the solo struggle is what life is all about. So it emphasizes a solo struggle against the way the world is. One cannot actually escape binarism, and it is indeed almost magical and impossible to go into the realm of the third principle as proposed by Salim. This is what his birthmate Shiva has to propose. So, the novel illustrates the dichotomy between duality and the advocated third principle. The offspring of the initial generation born at midnight possess magical abilities akin to their parents. These new children represent a fresh generation holding the potential to reshape the post-colonial India into what Salim envisions as the third principle. It could be the position of the liminals, which is neither here nor there, which is the third possibility, right? The liminal possibility, the possibility where boundaries leak, the boundaries are or the categories are not compartmentalized anymore. This vision involves transcending, therefore, the persistent dualities of masses and classes, capital and labor, as well as them and us. The prospect is that of a united India, which is which is free of the shackles, free from the shackles of endless divisions. So, modernization and religious communal identity represent opposing poles which lead to dualism. Nehru's 5-year plan aiming at industrial, agricultural and educational improvements falter, leading to the failure of modernization. Religious and communal identity suffer under the abuses of the emergency, marked by population control, curfews and civil rights limitations to control the masses. So, these are some of the historical events, chapters that are very well represented in Midnight's Children. How the third principle becomes almost an impossibility, but sought, but proposed again and again. Guided by his storied grandfather and influenced by German studies and political instincts, Salim Sinai inherits curiosity, facilitating adaptation and learning from experiences in order to embody this third principle. So, Salim wants to embody, he wants to become, and he is inspired and he wants to become the third principle. He wants to represent the third principle. His sense of exceptionalism, fueled by his peculiar birth date and the accolades that it calls for. So, his sense of exceptionalism, fueled by his peculiar birth date and the accolades that it receives, because he is born on a very historically important day. He was born on the day of India's independence, positions him almost as an outsider. So, despite this, his keen observational abilities grant him insight into others' motivations. His telepathic gifts, his problem sensing ability, incarceration, torture, and his connection with picture seeing, all of these lead him to contemplate communism during a historical juncture where such a choice seems pragmatic and so, despite this, his keen observational abilities grant him insight into others' motivations. His telepathic gifts, problem sensing ability, incarceration, torture, and connection with picture seeing, all of these lead him to contemplate communism during a historical juncture where such a choice appears as the most feasible, as the most pragmatic choice. I would like to stop my lecture here and let's meet once again with another round of discussions and another lecture. Thank you.